Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasan. So lately, the last few weeks, a couple of families have been getting together. We've been doing family programs, and after a little bit of conversation, we decided to take on the paramis, the 10 paramis, as a theme, and choosing a new one each week. It's a great way to get started because they're so universal, yeah? Loving kindness, honesty, compassion, generosity. We can all connect with them, and we get really good at it. Then we can get to the things like suffering, Eightfold Path, all the other stuff that most adults probably need help trying to figure how to think about. But as we've been looking at the paramis, kind of the moment we got into looking at the perfections of character, the best reference material are what are called the Jatakas, and these are stories. As the tradition goes, there's stories of the Buddha's past lives before he became a Buddha, way back to the time when he first decided to become a Buddha, and then all the things that followed until he succeeded in his final life. And as I say, it's tradition. It's tradition, and it's implying that the Buddha, that you're taking a lot of stuff on faith as you read these. It's implying that there's karma, there's intention, and that there's rebirth. You're going through these cycles, and it's only your intention to break from the cycle that really lasts and transcends the cycle itself. Otherwise, everything else is coming and going. And now it's it's my understanding that there are a lot of card-carrying Buddhists these days who don't believe in rebirth. Who are really not on board for the whole karma and rebirth thing. They're like, YOLO, you only live once. And that Buddhism still works for them, but they're like, hey, that's cultural stuff. I'm not taking it on. And so I feel not, I have no problem with the Jatakas at all. Because we don't know if they're true. We don't know if they're false, but we know 100% certain Spider-Man is not true. Yet billions of people know about Spider-Man, and they tell the story over and over again. They'll go to the movies a dozen times, and they'll chant, and they'll throw things at the screen, and they'll get all excited. So why not the Jatakas? Yeah, they're good stories, right? But they do kind of imply that if you're going to learn something from them, you have to kind of suspend the disbelief about karma and rebirth and all of that, because that's kind of the narrative. As I was sort of looking into it, and we've decided actually for the family group to take on karma for the next theme, because we realized we were just kind of assuming that everybody was on the same page, and everybody could not be on the same page. And this is something you usually realize after you've given a long discussion of karma. Somebody's like, I don't believe in this. And you're like, oh, oops. I just kind of figured we were all on the same page there, about rebirth and samsara and all of that. So, going back and looking at karma is very interesting, because this is something the full workings of karma is something the Buddha said is imponderable. And he literally said, if you try to figure it out, your head will explode. Nevertheless, that's what we're going to do tonight. we're going to try to just consider what it is we're talking about when we're talking about karma, and really get past the kind of stigmas around it. Part of the reason there are some people who are for it and some people who are against it is because over the years, especially in the Theravada branch of Buddhism, they've gotten to be really hardliners about this. They say, you must believe in karma, you must believe in rebirth to be, a Buddhist. And that's this sort of Theravada party line. It's the doctrine, yeah. But when we go back to the time of the Buddha, we actually find that that's not explicitly said. There's something different is said. And so the Buddha is very clear about what is wrong view, what are views that just do not work, that always kind of come back to bite us. And so wrong views are stuff like it's meaningless to give, there's no point to it. There's no results for good and bad deeds. And there have been philosophers throughout history who have been like, no, it doesn't matter. It's all random. The Buddha said this just doesn't work. It's wrong view to say there is no other world. There is no afterlife. There is no other beings. There's no other realms. And it's wrong to say mother and father don't matter. It's wrong to say there are no beings that are born spontaneously. That is, there are no beings out there who are not generated by biology. You're basically saying there's no beings that are celestial. And it's wrong view to believe that nobody can really have any answers to this. There's nobody out there who's figured these things out. They're unknowable. So the Buddha said, the reason these views do not work is because they just stop you from doing anything wholesome when you take on these views. You say, you believe there's no reason, there's no effect, there's no consequence of good or bad actions, then why would you cultivate good over bad? And just the definition of it kind of implies that we recognize there is good and bad. And it's kind of to each person to decide what is good and bad, But I think we can all agree there are some things we want and some things we don't want. If somebody's holding the view, there's no consequence of good and bad actions. And yet at the same time, they have things they want and things they don't want. You see, their view doesn't match their conduct. And so where we get into a lot of discussion of karma and rebirth is what the Buddha called mundane right view. And he said, this is the right view, which is still influenced by delusion and takes the side of morality. But to this extent, this is the kind of views that you can hold that will help you get what you want. They'll help you improving. They'll help you being a good person. Things will get better for you if you hold these kinds of views. If you see me looking up here, it's because I wrote them down. They can be found in Majjhima Nikaya 117, if anybody's curious. And so it goes, there is giving, offering, and sacrifice. There are fruits and results of good and bad deeds. There is the other world. There is mother, there is father, and there are beings that arise spontaneously without either. There are ascetics and priests who are well practiced and attained, who can describe the workings of this world and the other world, and have arrived at this understanding from their own insight. So, without really going too deeply into questions of, is that ultimately right? Without getting too philosophical, we just see how that lands with us. How does that resonate with us when somebody says these things, right? No, your mother matters, your father matters. There are beings out there who are celestial. There is another world. There are things going on beyond, just getting to work tomorrow, or the taste of an orange. There's more bigger things. There's a cosmos, and that our actions matter. So this is what the Theravada tradition has taken and extrapolated to be like, no, you have to believe in karma and rebirth for this whole practice to make any sense and work. The Buddha doesn't quite take it that far, but kind of when you look at this list, he's saying if you don't at least take these things on, you will notice it's really hard to develop the path. Because these are the basic views which give you that sense of what it is, why you would even try. Why would you try to get better? And some of them are kind of recognizing very subtle things about the world, like that mother and father matter. One of the worst things you can do in Buddhist cosmology is to kill your mother or father. Is to imply that there's a sort of debt, when we're born, and it goes in one direction. That the parents could eat the children if necessary. The children kind of, in some way, can't ever pay back the debt they owe because they owe everything. Literally, their every breath is because of their parents. And but there are also there's this idea of beings like arising based on what? Based on karma. So this is there's basically the whole phrase is implying that there is something out there. There's structure to the cosmos. And I was talking with a friend today, and there's this idea that you'll hear from time to time that everything is random, that it's just random. And the idea of karma and this definition of mundane right view is saying no. It's saying that actually nothing is random, that there is a structure out in the cosmos, and it might not be written on stone tablets somewhere, or you might not have a big guy on a cloud with a beard who will make sure that it works out this way. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that if there is a big guy on a cloud somewhere with a beard, he has to follow these rules too. These rules apply to him too. This is a structure to the universe that is impersonal. And this is something that that we're encouraged to look at and to take on, because what would be the opposite? Well, the opposite just leads in the direction of being a sociopath or running in philosophical circles. It doesn't do us any good. So taking these on, whether or not they're right, we can just feel like they'll help us. Yeah. If we believe in giving, we'll give. If we give, we'll feel good about giving. People will appreciate that we give. Our life will get better. If it turns out to be completely false, it doesn't matter. Our life got better. And the Buddha said this is the most objective standard by which to decide what should we do and what should we not do. There's a sutta, a famous sutta to the people called the Kalamas. And the Kalamas had all sorts of philosophical people, teachers coming through their village. And they heard everything, every possible viewpoint on the world. And then the Buddha comes through and they're like, what do we believe? Everybody's contradicting everybody else. And the Buddha said, yeah, it's all right that you're confused. You're hearing all these different viewpoints, but just look, at your own life. And if you do something and it leads to a positive result, if it's wholesome and it leads to a positive result, and you know that for yourself, then that's what you should be doing. And of course, the Kalamas are like, well, that's the one thing nobody has said yet. They've said, listen to me, or I'm the authority, or this is the way things are. But they didn't say, like, figure it out for yourself. There are these universal principles. You can study them and you can learn them and you can realize it for yourself. And that is a refuge in Buddha. There's a refuge in enlightenment, that we can't figure these things out for ourselves. That we can take it on as a working hypothesis that maybe there is this universal law of cause and effect. And that's what we're talking about with karma. And now we still have only just scratched the surface of the topic of karma, because what is karma then? So Buddha said there's three kinds of karma. There's kusala karma, wholesome karma. There's akusala, unwholesome karma. And then there's neither kusala nor akusala. There's this sort of neutral karma, or non-resultant karma. And so the wholesome always has a pleasant, desirable result. The unwholesome always has an unpleasant, undesired result. And the third kind doesn't necessarily have a resultant. Yeah, it's just it's a kind of neutral category. And many of the things that we cultivate in the beginning of the path, we're trying to cultivate the wholesome. Why? Because we want support in further cultivating the path. So we want things to work out the way we want them to work out. But as we start to develop, we start cultivating more of the third category, because we actually we want things to settle. We're not trying to perpetuate this cycle. And that's what we find with the first two kinds. They create a future, they create a result. And that's looking at karma. And looking at karma is to understand that we're staking, we're understanding the world in terms of that there will be a consequence for our actions based on intention. If we do something and we mean to do it, there will be a resonance, there will be a result. It's like if you're standing next to a body of water, and you take a stone and you throw it down into the water, it splashes, right? And the water gets on you. Now, whose fault is that? Is it your fault? Is it the rock's fault? Is it the water's fault? What we're really looking at with karma is we're saying that is nobody's fault. Karma is not about blame. It's not about judgment. It's not something punitive at all. It's natural. There is no blame, and neither you nor the rock nor the water is ultimately the cause of you getting wet. Nevertheless, if you were to get confused about the matter of why you got wet, well, that's what the whole teaching of karma, is meant to show you. It's like your action of throwing the stone had a consequence. That was the consequence. It was actually, in that instance, pretty predictable. Yeah. And as it turns out, most of the things that happen in terms of cause and effect are ultimately predictable. That's what the Buddha is boiling it down to. There is a result of wholesome and unwholesome karma. And we come to understand that unequivocally, the wholesome will give us a good result. But what we can't say is when or how. We just know it will be ultimately for the best. And the same with unwholesome. We're in some degree, we have to take it on faith at first. Until we've really studied this principle, we're kind of saying, okay, I'm hearing that killing is bad, so I'm gonna try to restrain, killing my neighbors. And then we're like, okay, I'm gonna restrain from killing lizards in my yard. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna refrain from swatting mosquitoes that bite me. And along the way, we look at what's going on, and we see the shock on people's faces when we kill something. We these tense discussions with our pacifist, vegetarian, vegan friends. We're like, you find another way. We realize, if we had just not killed the thing, we wouldn't have had the whole conversation with our vegan friends in the first place. So like, oh, okay, so that action has that resultant. Karma can come through multiple channels. The Buddha kind of simplifies it by saying there's mental karma, there's vocal karma, speech karma, and there's bodily karma. Yeah. And so when we look at cause and effect, it's a kind of shorthand that we can say that a physical action will probably get some sort of physical results in the future. That's not exactly how it works out. It's not one-to-one, because the Buddha points out that karma is tiered. So our world is generated from the mind, from intention. And our intentions form our perception of the world. Our perception of the world is the basis of our speech, our vocal patterns. We say, it is like that, it's like that, it's like that, that's speech, yeah? This is how I see it. And that is sort of what leads us into different actions. Like, no, it has to be this way, and so we do it physically with our body. And so these are the three modes of karma, but they're not equal. So this is something we also start to investigate, is the ways that they're not equal. And there's actually, curiously, two of the groups in the time of the Buddha who were really butting heads a lot were the Buddhists and the Jains. And it's curious because at the time the Buddha, like he'd often get in these little debates with the followers of the Jains, but when he like picked apart all the different philosophies that were existing at the time, the Jains ranked the highest out of all of them, because they believe in karma, they believe in giving, they believe in mother and father. They've only got really one thing kind of wrong in the scenario, is they believed that the physical actions mattered the most and that the mental ones not so much. And actually, as it turns out, that's the most obvious stance, right? You know, if we kill somebody, the cops are going to come after us very quickly. Yeah. And it seems like in that scenario, our guilt and our remorse over having killed somebody is negligible to the fact that we're about to get caught and thrown in prison. That seems like the worst scenario. But even if we get caught and thrown in prison, does that mean that our regret goes away? Well, no, actually, when we look at it, the regret lasts a lot longer and fills a lot more mind moments, even if we're caught right away. It takes a long time to kind of get over the regret. And the regret is not something we can avoid, right? So regret is a form of immediate mental consequence. So let's say I have another simile, and this is one that the Buddha uses in the Majjhima Nikaya again, in a sutta called the Upali Sutta. So Upali was a follower of the Jains, and they loved him. He was their star pupil, and they were talking amongst themselves, and they were saying, we should go and refute the Buddha's doctrine, because he's saying that mental karma is more important than physical karma. And they're like, we should send Upali. And everybody was saying, no, the Buddha has this conversion magic. he'll win over Upali, don't do it. But they sent Upali. And Upali goes to the Buddha and he says, the physical actions matter way more than mental actions. And the Buddha uses a bunch of similes. And one of them relies on psychic powers. And it says if somebody were to go up and down the bank of the Ganges River with a knife, cutting people up, could he do a lot of death? Yeah. So, yeah, he could kill a lot of people. Could he kill all the people in this whole city of Vesali? And it's like, no, it would take weeks, months, years. 100 people wouldn't be able to kill all the people in this city. And it was said, okay, now suppose you have somebody with psychic powers such that they could level an entire city with their mind. And they could do it with a single mental impulse of hate. Could they level the city? Well, yeah, if they have that psychic power, then they could level the whole city. So didn't you just say that physical matters more than mental in that simile? But I thought of a more modern take on this, as you think of all the people who are killed with guns, right? So how much physical energy does it take to fire a gun? Right? That's all it takes. But how much mental energy does it take to fire a gun at a human being? It takes a lot, right? So you say these two things are not equal. But now, how much energy does it take to press the fire button on a nuclear weapon? The same amount as to fire a gun. And yet, how many millions of guns are fired every day? And yet there's only, twice in our history when a nuclear weapon has been used on, other people. So, I mean, it actually scales how much more anger and delusion and greed you need to kill the people. It scales mentally. That's a kind of vivid example of karma and how it's working out. But now, just to see how much effort it takes to do something, that's another way we can understand consequence, yeah? So if it takes a lot of anger or greed or delusion to do something in the mental realm, then you're going to get that much energy back out of the system. There's going to be that much consequence. So if you just accidentally step on a bug, you can expect very little consequence out of that action. But if you intentionally stomp on some bugs, just the mental anger and emotion that it took, because the mind is weighted more, you expect there's going to be a resultant. But probably one of the things that people who are against the idea of karma get the most upset about is the idea of predetermination and the idea of specific consequences. So something that developed along with the birth stories and the Jatakas is this idea that somebody does something in one lifetime and a million lifetimes later, they get this very specific result, yeah? So the Buddha in one lifetime, he's a pro wrestler, and he had this habit of breaking people's backs because he was so strong. And then in his final life as the Buddha Gautama, he had a back problem. And the commentators to the suttas, they're saying, oh, it's back when he was breaking backs that formed a karmic resultant that ripened in this life. And so it's important to say that there is this notion for the Jains and in Hinduism of this specific result, yeah? You kill a frog in one lifetime, and many lifetimes later, a frog kills you. I don't know, somehow it swims into your mouth while you're swimming and you choke on it and die. Or somebody kills you in the exact same way that you killed the frog. Maybe you step on the frog and maybe somebody runs you over with a car in a future lifetime. And it's one-to-one exact replica of the circumstances. And this is not, even this is not what the Buddha is saying about karma. And it's not what we're taking on in faith. If we cheat on our taxes, we don't know that the tax collector in some future life is going to just come to us with a bill for money that we don't owe in that life, and we've got to pay it. We don't know that. We don't know specifically. But what we are taking on faith and what we can work with is the idea that there must be a consequence, that the consequence is inescapable of a particular action. If it's a wholesome action, there will be a fruit. We say phala, there'll be a fruit, there will be a pleasant result, and that we don't have to do anything. And even if we follow up that good action with a bunch of bad actions, it doesn't negate the fact that we're going to get some good result from that good action that we did. And we can see this at work. We see really bad people still have people who love them. Yeah. Who send them gifts, who light a candle for them. One of the most vivid stories of this is Angulimala in the time of the Buddha. There's this mass murderer, yeah, and the Buddha is able to get through to him through compassion and a display of psychic powers. And Angulimala throws down his weapons and becomes a monk. He realized the error of his ways. And this idea that, even as Angulimala became a monk and he's decided to pursue enlightenment, he didn't escape the consequences of his action. Nevertheless, it wasn't one-to-one. Like the second he became a monk, people didn't come at him with swords and spears and kill him, because that would be one-to-one. Our actions do change the consequences. It's not like we kill the frog and then in a future life we get killed, because that would imply that everything we did in between those two events did nothing to change the outcome. And that's not the way that karma is working. But the reality is we kill the frog, that's unwholesome. We know that there is an unwholesome consequence that's coming in the future and it can't be avoided. But now it can be, when it lands, when it ripens, what will it ripen into? That's actually something we do have some chance to affect, because that actually makes all the time in between make sense, matter, all the rest of our choices. So Angulimala, yeah, he killed 999 people reportedly. I mean, somebody counted. But after he became a monk, people didn't come to him and just kill him immediately, but they threw rocks at him and they called him names and they chased him out of their towns. Like, he still got a resultant, but it was modified by the fact that he had gone forth. It was modified by his new intention and the sincerity with which he was practicing it. So this is an example that karma is actually bigger and more diverse than we usually give it credit for. This is why the Buddha said, be careful, you might not totally get it. But that's the thing, we don't need to. We don't need to totally understand the one-to-one causal relationship, because the reality is we're probably, based on intention, making a lot of decisions all of the time. And that all of these decisions will have consequences. And that all of these consequences are modifying each other. So maybe, yeah, we don't need to figure out what's going to happen to us, because what's more important is knowing that something will happen to us. Because knowing that and developing confidence in that will lead us to making better decisions. It's called right view because it gives us the basis for improvement, gives us the basis for making positive changes, it's the basis for improving our situation. So that's why it's called right view. And the idea of rebirth is just built into this. So if we're willing to take on that, as long as there's a person, there is going to be, these consequences are going to be felt. Then, you're also kind of surmising, if there's any belief in an afterlife, there's any belief in an existence after you die, well, then the consequences are going to keep coming. Doesn't mean the causality is broken. So you do something bad in this life, it doesn't mean that once you die, the slate is wiped clean. Because what's being implied is that this is a impersonal, universal law. So it doesn't seem fair. We can kill the frog in this lifetime, and then in a future lifetime, when we're somebody totally different who actually loves frogs, something bad happens to us. It doesn't seem fair unless we're willing to accept that this is impersonal. It doesn't care. It's like things have consequences, and that we can't escape them, even by dying. You don't get out of it. Why? Well, because there's this implication that things are a lot bigger than just us, that the universe is still going even if we stop. Even if we die, the machinery is still there. And that the only way there would be no consequence is if there's no being to receive the consequences, in which case it's the causal chain is broken. And so, this is part of the Buddha is talking about the third kind of karma, is that karma where a selfless karma, egoless karma, is just creating an empty space, where we don't get involved, where we're observant, where we're filled with a wholesome emotion, and we're just watching the scenario as it plays out. We're not adding or subtracting anything, and so therefore there's no consequence to that action. Yeah, if we were to completely cultivate the third kind of karma, then that flow of consequences would eventually run out. And this is something that's getting into what it means to be enlightened, or what it means to stop that cycle of rebirths. Yeah, but it's to say that as long as we are here, we are in samsara. As long as we're in this body, we're subject to these laws of karma. And that is it's something for us to look at and consider. What is our relationship to these forces? How much of what I just said are we willing to buy into? That there is good and bad, okay. That there is neither, maybe. That there's another world, that there's consequences in future lives. What do we actually believe? Because when it comes down to it, the Buddha said, don't take something on faith, or because you believe in the teacher, because you've been told it's right, or it's been passed down for generations, or even because it makes logical sense. Only take something on when you see it working in your own life. So how could we investigate this and consider, is this the case? Yeah. And if we did find that taking this on does seem to work for us, well, that should be the number one objective standard for continuing with it. Yeah. And so the question of whether or not rebirth is necessary to be a Buddhist is you can set it aside. Yeah. It's more of a question like, is it possible to practice wholeheartedly, not being willing to take on these ideas and not being willing to take responsibility? So it's interesting when the Buddha talks about a stream enterer, he says there's something they're completely incapable of doing, and that is attempting to hide an unwholesome act. So the very definition of what it means to be enlightened seems to be intertwined with this notion of understanding causality. Stream enterer has given up any idea that they will ever get away from the consequence of an unwholesome act. And in so doing, they've understood the best way to purify, or the best way to resolve the consequence, is to accept it. This is the basic level of equanimity, while it's not stated explicitly, you must believe in karma, is that in order to be on the path to full enlightenment, you kind of have to accept that you're gonna get what's coming to you. So in that way, you can kind of say it's like this is not simply about it has to be this way, but it's like, if you were to chart a course to freedom, what would that course look like? Well, it would rely on these things, and that's how we use karma in the Buddhist tradition. It's multifaceted. It's big. It's all encompassing, and it's way bigger than us. So we don't necessarily have to get it, but like a fish in water, we have to admit there is water. We have to admit we are in this. Yeah, and it is important to consider, and that in considering it, we probably are better off. So it's a lot to think about, and I don't know if I dare open it up to questions. It's a big topic, but the night is young. Why the heck not? So we got our friends here in person, we've got our friends online, and anybody who has any questions or comments or answers to any question I inadvertently asked, I invite you to join the conversation.
Bhante, can I ask something?
Yes, Andrew.
Was there a moment for you personally when you were convinced of the truth of rebirth, like when this came to you, when you came to know it to be true?
I don't know it to be true. And I think that's the weirdest thing, is I could be totally wrong. The Christians could be right. I could be going to hell. I'm willing to admit that. I don't know. But that's actually something that has been growing over time, is like I'm willing to admit how much I don't know. That's the confidence. It's a weird kind of confidence that's been growing. I can say that I am not aware of ever really having doubted it. It just seemed intuitive to me. So I don't feel like I had to overcome it. You know, I guess I didn't have any strong views against rebirth. So in that way, if you've got a beef with rebirth, you should find somebody who's actually had to work through it. Because I was just like, it's like Spider-Man, right? It's like, it's a good story. It makes sense. It's engaging.
I've got one.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems like a pretty subtle difference that is made much of, the difference between the pernicious view of a different way of saying rebirth and rebirth, which seems almost identical. And like one the Buddha gets really upset about, but rebirth is okay. And I just like, I think just like remembering this distinction, because I think the basic thing is just like is like just making sure you put the disclaimer that there is no I to be rebirthed, and then you have to say that, and then you can believe in rebirth. Mm-hmm. But then if you don't make the disclaimer, you get into a lot of trouble. Yeah. So what's the importance of all of that?
Yeah, no, totally. For those who don't know what that is, if you use the word reincarnation, then everyone, because there's an implication there. There's an implication of something being incarnated. So in the greater sense of not self, right? This idea of there's no thing that's intrinsically you, is there's nothing intrinsically that's passing from birth to birth. So what's happening is there's this life, and it's karmically generated, and it plays out, and then the being passes away, consciousness ceases. And then a new consciousness arises somewhere. And the thing is that the same karmic patterns, the same consequences and stream of consequences is arising in that new being, but that there wasn't this gooey, ectoplasmic soul that kind of shot across the universe and landed in that body. No, that's what the distinction is. So when you say rebirth, you took a birth, you died, you took another birth.
There's just no continuity.
There's no way to say it perfectly either. It's like our language is just based along certain ideas and premises. So this is one of the things that you have to work on. Like as a practitioner, it doesn't work to just say like, yeah, there's no self. Like I quotation marks believe in not self. It just doesn't work. You have to investigate. Like, do I really think there's something continuous? the question that came, it's been coming up for thousands of years. It's like, if there's no continuity, there's no being reborn, then what is it that's receiving the consequences of previous skillful and unskillful actions? And the Buddha's like, no, the question's bogus. It's got an assumption there. The assumption is that you need to have a being reborn to have the consequences there. And the Buddha is saying, no, you just watch. Being winks out, dead, nothing. New one pops up. Same karmic things happening. There was nothing in between. There was nothing connecting. As I get it. Yeah. And you just gotta investigate. Does there need to be a soul there for this to work in my mind? And at some point you're like, I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I think we have a question from Phil. Is the thing you mentioned about stream enters being unable to hide unwholesome acts tied into them not being able to break the 5 precepts, i.e. not able to lie? Or is that a separate thing the Buddha mentioned? They're one and the same. So something really cool about the stages of enlightenment that the Buddha laid out is, in some ways, it's kind of cataclysmic. There's like a complete shift in paradigm that happens. So you get a whole bunch of behaviors change all at once. And so you can't say that they're different necessarily. So at the point that you completely take on an understanding of consequence, such that you can never get away from unwholesome actions, at the same time, you understand the purification, the penance for unwholesome actions, and the best way to deal with them. It arises simultaneously. At the same time, what arises is called the virtue dear to the noble ones. And that is because you'll never get away from the consequence of killing, you've lost all desire to kill. There's ultimately somewhere down there, when we form an intention to kill something, we believe that we could make it end and that our life would get better. Now that so-and-so would just die, I'll be happy. Well, the stream enterer has gotten past that idea. They know that the unhappiness comes from wanting so-and-so not to exist. And that no matter how miserable so-and-so is, that mind state of wanting them not to exist is worse. And so better just put up with them somehow.
A little quick comment.
Yeah.
Something that I find kind of helpful in this understanding of karma, though I feel like generally, yes, I don't have much understanding of it, but I like to really appreciate how things also give fruit here and now. Like when you generate an unwholesome intention, yes, something may come down the line to reciprocate that, or however you want to say it, but also how do you feel right now? The suffering is already there. You're already experiencing the fruit. That just is something that's easier to resonate with me. So I just wanted to share it because maybe it'll help.
Thank you. Yeah, because I mean, trying to tackle a really big topic, but that's the most obvious one. Yeah. It feels bad to do bad things.
Yeah.
To twist somebody's arm to figure that out. Some people, yeah, they argue, no, I like doing bad things. Any last call? Okay. And you say, Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you all for joining, for taking precepts, for listening, and for considering these things, which I sincerely believe can make us better people.